Hey, what's going on, everybody? My name is Shavi Zane, and I am coming on to have a discussion with you all in regards to a message that really came. It came to me yesterday. Okay, I feel like I've been receiving bits and pieces of this message, but it really hit home yesterday. So I can begin by saying that there is a forest preserve around where I stay at. Okay, and this forest preserve, myself and my children have gone to this forest preserve multiple times in the past. I generally go there and I receive a lot of spiritual uploads, a lot of synchronicities, animals, feathers, all types of things. And for some reason, as of the past month or so, I've pulled back from going there. But in my experience there, I did experience a lot of like almost supernatural type of experiences that brought me to tears, where I felt the energy of the ancestors, like my ancestors, because this is the region where many of my ancestors would have been. And this particular forest preserve, it actually has on the landmass, there is houses, like the little log cabins and the houses that used to belong to many of the slaves. Okay, there's also a certain area where there's like a cotton field. It's they cut down most of it, but there's still like a small patch of cotton that still grows in one area, so you know that it was a slave landmass, as well as a lot of the monuments that they have throughout the actual grounds throughout this particular forest preserve. They have like different statues and little plaques that you can read that's dedicated to people like George Washington and certain, I guess, what they might call prominent figures within the U.S. as the U.S. was being built and during the time of slavery. And so, just looking at the homes, the little log cabins, you can clearly see that it was a slave ground. Okay, and so me and my children went there yesterday, and just because my daughter had randomly asked to go, and so I was like, well, we haven't been there in a minute, so we went. They had lots of Christmas lights and things of that nature, which I don't personally celebrate holidays for other reasons, which we might discuss in a further in a another discussion. But they wanted to go, and so we went and we walked around, and there was just a very eerie feeling that I had while I was there. One that I have never felt before, and there was a lot of people there, okay, because many of them came because they wanted to bring their children to see the lights and things of that nature. But it was just something that didn't sit well with my spirit, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. And so we stayed there for a couple of hours. I planted my feet in the grass. I set my intentions, and there's been quite a few occasions where I've gone there knowing that, because I felt so strongly drawn to this area, that my ancestors must have been on this land at some point in history. That I have actually prayed over the land and set my intentions that they would be released and set free in the spiritual realm, and that they would also be able to come through to bring me messages and wisdom in regards to what took place there on that land. Okay, and so I received a revelation last night. I went to sleep and I was jolted out of my sleep. Like, literally, I felt like I was having somewhat of a panic attack, because that's how I was jolted out of my sleep. So I had to regain my composure and calm down. And in that moment, I heard that these people who own this particular land, as well as other land masses that have been highly populated with what were slaves, these kidnappers, these criminals who actually kidnap people and force them into slavery, that they maintain these particular regions in order to do rituals, and in order to maintain a certain energy that they put out into the universe based on what took place there on that landmass through, with our ancestors. Okay, and so this message um, is directly towards the black man, woman, and child. This message is to bring some enlightenment in terms of the spiritual nature of what has been happening for our ancestors, and what it means to have the name of the kidnapper of your ancestors. Now, I'm not going to use the term slave master. I'm going to try to avoid using that term, because it gives power to the person who kidnapped. First of all, it says that your ancestor is a slave, and that the kidnapper, the criminal who took them, is a master. So you want to try to release yourself from using those two terms in conjunction in order to describe these criminals who have committed mass murder against our ancestors, okay? And crimes against our ancestors. Now, I just want to get into some of the notes that I took down because I had so much that was coming in. But I want to first start off by discussing the scripture that was largely used against our ancestors during the time of enslavement. One of them being Ephesians 6 and 5. Now, as you know, the only thing that was given to our ancestors at that time was the Bible, okay, which they was able to use this particular text in order to support their agenda, to support what they was doing to our ancestors, to support their criminal behavior, okay, and their demonic, wicked, psychologically distorted behavior. And so one of the scriptures that they had our ancestors read was in regards to Ephesians 6 and 5. And it began here, let's see, servants, be obedient to them that are your masters, according to the flesh, with fear and trembling, in singleness of your heart and unto Christ, not with eye service as men pleasers, but as the servants of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart, with good will, doing service as to the Lord and not to men. And so when I read this passage, obviously they're telling them that they need to be obedient to their master, pretty much saying that this scripture is saying you are inferior to this person who has now coined themselves as being your master. This person who has kidnapped you and enslaved you is now your master, and that you must fear them with trembling. Okay? With trembling, you must fear them as you would unto Christ. Okay? Which we've already discussed in a previous message, who Christ was in terms of Jesus, who their Jesus was that they created. Okay? An illusion, a white image, which was a stolen identity of Yeshua, which is a black man. They sacrificed Yeshua in order to create a structure for themselves, and they used him as the image that would actually give them power underneath the agenda, okay, to empower their agenda. And through him, they would take his lineage and those who was directly attached to the tribes, the true Jews, and they would use the energy of the black man, woman, and child to feed the beast of this false illusion, who is Jesus. Again, the white man, who was a painting of Caesar Borgia. Now, this particular scripture, it also speaks on, and with good will, doing service as to the Lord and not to men. So understand that the definition of Lord, when this scripture speaks on doing service unto the Lord is used multiple times throughout the Bible. And as you know, Lord is actually a term that has been used to also define someone who has power, authority, or influence, a master or a ruler, okay? And so these people who were criminals called themselves slave masters. And so the definition of a Lord is someone who is a master or a ruler. And so when you read scripture and it tells you to be obedient to the Lord, it is not speaking on the Most High God. It's speaking on someone who has placed themselves in a position to be Lord over you, okay, in terms of Lord over our ancestors. This is the position they placed themselves in through creating fear for our ancestors, okay? And so these people understood how to use biblical text to support their agenda. But please understand, once again, that these people always do things in preparation for generations to come in order to maintain their power, in order to keep the illusion going over the masses so that we would never awaken to see through the agenda, okay? And so they had planned this long before, when they began to tamper with biblical text, switch things around, add things to it, remove multiple texts from the Bible, okay? I feel like it was, at least about 70 or more books of the Bible that was removed, okay? But it's hard to even define how many was taken out, because who really possesses the very first biblical text, okay? And so, and if they do say that they have the very first biblical text, then who's to say that they're actually telling the truth in terms of what was really in there? Okay, please understand that these people, they're criminals. They're psychologically distorted. Okay, people who naturally feel inferior because of, and it is largely because of the color of their skin. Now, again, I have to put this warning out there for those of you who are sensitive. If you are Caucasian and you are joined to my channel, then feel free to stay and listen if you understand the nature of the spiritual ramifications of these things that have been done by other Caucasian people. If this is not who you are, if this is not your nature, then you should feel comfortable with this information being brought forward, okay? If you don't, then there's nothing I can do to help you, and I'm really not concerned about it, okay? So I'm going to move forward. The people who use this against black skinned people understood that there's a lot of power in melanin. And I have explained this to you all before in terms of the connection that we have being able to absorb the information of the sun, which is the most powerful energetic source in the solar system. We absorb the UV rays of the sunlight, which allows us to unlock our DNA and awaken to a lot of gifts that we have naturally, okay? The Most High created us and fashioned us in that way. And also to speak on the fact that Caucasian people are the minority of the planet, okay? They might populate maybe about 1/10 of those people who exist. The rest of the world is melanated people, okay? With much more melanin in their vessels, okay? Whether you are Chinese, whether you are Indian, whether you are Middle Eastern, whatever you want to call yourself, African, most of the globe is populated with melanated people, okay? So Caucasians are a very small minority, but what they did was they came in and they switched everything around, and they told black people that we are the minority and that they are the majority. And how did they do that? Well, they could do that based on the fact that they have a strong influence over how numbers are put out into the masses, how you receive your information, okay? They're the ones that control the media, the television, the newspapers, and all of these things where these statistics are brought forward based on his story, okay? Based on his story, he says that he is the majority and that we are the minority. But it's very clear when you look throughout the entire globe that melanated people have been here for a very long time, and we ain't going nowhere, okay? Sorry to tell you, okay, to those who have a problem with us, we ain't going nowhere, okay? But this has been the hopes of many of these people who are psychologically distorted in their own mind, who have this superiority complex, okay, who need to feel that they are empowered. So what I wanted to talk to you all about is, when I received this information, it was shown to me that these people, again, have been using these land masses to harness in an energy of the generations that will come from those who they enslaved, our ancestors that they kidnapped. They would harness the energy of the generations that will proceed from them through the kidnapper's name. So as you know, many of these people, these kidnappers who owned our ancestors, the kings and queens, okay, they beat out of them their spiritual belief systems. They beat out of them their understanding of their connection to all things that exist around them. They beat out of them their understanding of who they were, okay? And so that was a normal thing for these kidnappers and criminals to do, was to take them and to enforce upon them a new name, to enforce upon them a new way of seeing life, and to enforce upon them this inferiority complex, okay? That's how they kept them in submission. And because these kidnappers were very fearful of the powers that we naturally possess as melanated beings, they understood that in numbers, if we were to awaken and to understand who we were, we would have annihilated their asses. We would have kicked their asses, okay? And so they was very fearful of the power that we naturally possessed. And so out of fear, they beat fear into us. They did crazy things such as castrating our men, or raping our women, or raping our children, killing the men, hanging them, lynching them, tearing them apart, making them get, putting the children into water, making them alligator bait, okay? Doing all types of things. These people, very sick, psychologically and sick, okay? These same people would eventually become the U.S. corporation. These people would eventually become the pastors, the priests, the judges, the attorneys, the police officers, the doctors, everyone that's in a position of so-called authority that's a part of this U.S. corporation. They were first initially kidnappers, what they like to call themselves a slave master. That's where they began, okay? Because understand that slavery, based on their text, they say that slavery began in 1619. The U.S. corporation was not created until 1789. When I say U.S. corporation, I'm speaking on the U.S. government. It was not created until 1789. It was established then. And so understand that they had already created the system of slavery, okay? And they had already began many of the rituals, okay, here on this land on the backs of our ancestors, okay? And so it wasn't until later that they created the U.S. corporation, and many of those people who was in a position of so-called power and authority began with their so-called authority through slavery, becoming a so-called master of a slave. Okay, so the more slaves you had, the more power you possessed, okay? The more respected you were throughout the community, okay? And so these people would ultimately become those who would gather together and create a structure known as the U.S. government, or AKA the U.S. corporation, okay? They came together and created this business because the U.S. corporation is a business, just like any other incorporated business, okay? And so we see here that back then they would take the slave, or they would take our ancestor, our kings and queens, gods and goddesses, and they would beat out of them the power and the strength that we naturally possessed, and they would turn them into these docile people who they considered to be animals, who they considered to be less than human, okay? And they would emasculate the men and place fear within them. So pretty much, if you was to remember your name, if you was to remember your spiritual belief system, and if you was to enact on these things, if you was to actually put these things into motion, they would kill you, okay? And so out of fear, the mothers would teach their children, no, your name is Brown, rather than your original name, okay? Even though they might have remembered it, they decided to erase it out of their mind out of fear that if they even told their child what their original name was, or what their original spiritual belief system was, that if that child was to even mention it or utter it in front of these criminals, these psychopaths, that they would end up dead. And so as a survival tactic, these mothers and these fathers, our ancestors, would continue in enforcing what the kidnapper told them to teach their children. And so that's why there's another scripture that's not too far above this particular passage that speaks on where it's talking about children. Yes, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. And again, as I told you, that term Lord, that title Lord, is to define someone who has power, authority, or influence, a master or a ruler. So understand that all of this stuff was put together strategically in order to place fear over people, and especially when you take someone's spiritual belief system and you impart within them to replace that, you give them fear. You give them a white Jesus and you tell them, no, look at this scripture. It says Lord. Lord means, and you tell them the definition of what Lord means. No, Lord means that this is the Most High. This is the God that will come in and that will kill you. Okay, because it also says, and ye fathers, provoke not your children to wrath and bring them up in the nature and abomination of the Lord. Okay. And there's other passages as you go further down that that indicate that if you were to turn away from this particular teaching or this instruction, that you will face a wrath. There will be penalties, okay, for doing these types of things. And so understand that these people understood, first of all, these people also understood the nature of names. They understood the spiritual aspect of bonding someone to you through through your name, okay? And so when you take the name, the original name of someone, and you give them a name that is completely in opposition to their inherited name, okay, their natural born name, and you attach to that fear and dark energy, dark magic, and all of these different things, then you create a lineage and generations that carry, okay, that will continue to carry over the agenda, okay, whatever it is that these so-called these criminals use. So once they gave our ancestors their name, they saw them, they did this because this would establish them as their personal property. So if this kidnapper's name was Brown, they gave their slave, they gave our ancestors the name Brown in order to say, that is mine, that is my property, and so I do with it whatever I please because I have paid for it and I have established it as being my inheritance, my property, okay? And so many of these people, these kidnappers, also understood when they went, especially when they went throughout different land masses throughout Africa, and many of those enslaved who was here on the U.S. soil before the Africans were brought over here, because many of those who was Native Indians was also melanated people who also became slaves. If they didn't kill them, they enslaved them. They already understood the position that they possessed throughout their community. So let's just say they went over to somewhere in Africa and they took a chief or they took a king, someone who was known as, that was in a position of prestige, and he had certain gifts, like spiritual gifts. He was known to have these things. That would be like a golden ticket for these people. They would see that as being something that was of great value, someone of great value, which obviously a melanated man who is awakened to his powers and understands who he is as a king and who has unlocked his spiritual gifts is of great value. They would go and say, okay, I want that one. I'm going to beat into him submission. And then they would they would take his spiritual gifts, okay? In absence of, in what they would replace with, they would take his gifts and replace it with fear, okay? They give him fear, and in return they take his gifts, okay? Through dark magic, through rituals, through sacrifice, and all types of things, okay? And so they saw that as being their inheritance. Their so-called God-given inheritance was to take that which we naturally inherit and pass down from one generation to the next. They would take that, okay, from us and use it to their advantage in order to maintain their position of power, not just in society, but over us as a whole. Because once you strip us of our spiritual connection, once you strip us of our memory of who we are, and once you strip us of our natural spiritual gifts, and you replace that with inferiority complex and your name, you put your name, you brand us with your name, okay, then what's left is someone who is fearful, who does not have the ability to create his own freedom, okay? Or at least he assumes that he does not have it anymore, because at that point he has been beaten into submission. So this is what happened with our ancestors, okay? And so let me see what else I have here. because as we get towards the end, I want you all to stick around because there are certain things that I want you all to write down and burn so that we can release this stronghold over our ancestors, over us, and over generations that will come from us. I want you to write down a specific detailed statement, a proclamation that we will put out here in unison. I've already done it, and so I'm putting it out here so that you all can do it as well as lighting a candle, writing things on there that I have a specific proclamation to create. So we release and then we replace that void with what we want to create. So we need to do this in unison because this is us stepping back into our power, stepping back into our nature, and taking back authority over our lives and our generations to come in a spiritual realm so that this can manifest in the physical, because these people are still in this very moment today using their position of authority against those of us who carried their names. And this is why I've been having so many revelations about people being sacrificed and being organ harvesting and being used in sex trafficking, and all types of demonic things. Rituals have been happening to us in the present day because these people feel that they have the right to do it because many generations still carry the name of the so-called, what they want to call the slave master. And so what they do is they say, okay, well, they track you because these same people, like I told you, they ended up becoming the governmental structure. The same people who were slave, who owned our ancestors, who thought they owned our ancestors, became those who are in position of authority within the judicial system. These are like I said, the judges, the attorneys, the school teachers, the pastors, the priests. All of these people are in these positions. And so they assume that if you have their name, then you are still their property. And this is why so many Black people in America come up missing, okay? And so many children are stripped from their parents and placed into the foster care system to be more brainwashed because they feel, okay, this is our property. And so if I happen to get sick with kidney failure and I need a kidney, well, let me go and handpick someone from my property because they're still mine technically because they still carry my name. And the name is what established a so-called slave as being their property back then, and they still carry it today. It's just today they took the physical shackles off and put the shackles on the minds of people. And the only reason why many Black people continue to carry the name back then, especially after slavery was abolished, so-called, was because many of the Black people had forgotten their original names. And so in an attempt to keep that cohesiveness or to keep the lines of communication open, let's say your sister was taken and sold off in a whole nother state across the country and was given the name though of the and was given the name of the so-called the kidnapper, okay, then that sister would be able to maybe look you up and find you based on the name of the kidnapper that took you. And so many of our ancestors kept these names in hopes that they would eventually one day reunite with those who was kidnapped from them, okay, and stripped from their lives underneath the perversion and the psychological disorder of these criminals, okay. And so these people, they still exist. Please do not assume that just because they say it was abolished and that it no longer exists, and because you don't see people picking cotton in the fields, that these people don't still believe that they own those who have carried on their name from one generation to the next. No, from a distance, what they do is they send dark magic to these people. They create havoc for our people. They create they raise turmoil within the judicial system for our people. They sacrifice our people. They organ harvest on our people because they feel that they still have the right to do that. And these same people who have gained these positions of authority, they also gained a lot of money. A lot of money was gained through having slaves or having our people in their possession. Okay? And so because of that, They have used us. They have seen black people as being a part of their inheritance. Like it's right. They feel that we are rightfully their property. That is the mental, psychological disorder that these people possess. Okay. And so please understand that the name, the name that you carry holds energy. Okay. This is why many people end up changing their names when they go through spiritual awakenings, because they understand that names have vibration, names have energy. Okay. And this is why many of the names that we possessed before the kidnappings of our ancestors was very powerful names. We gave our children names based on what we anticipated they would eventually become. Okay, because we understood the energy behind the name. Okay, and so these people, they studied us and they understood that we knew these things, and so they took that and used it to their advantage and to our disadvantage. And so this is why they gave us these names. Okay, so I'm going to pull a few cards here before I close out, because I got a couple of questions where I want to back up what I am saying here energetically so that you all can see. So let me see here. The first question is, how has carrying the names of the kidnappers affected the black man, woman, and child? So carrying the names of the kidnappers, how has this affected the black man, woman, and child? Let's see what comes out here. How has carrying the names of the kidnappers, you see that says children right there. How has this affected the black man, woman, and child? So main female, okay, main female, which I would feel largely deals with the woman. You have wealthy man here, okay, wealthy man, and right behind that you have main male. So even though these are clearly Caucasian characters, I'm strongly feeling that the main female and the main male would deal with the black man and woman, and these people creating wealth on behalf of seeing the black man and woman as their property. Okay, stealing the inheritance of the black man and woman through taking their spiritual gifts and creating debt. Okay, and seeing them as being their own property in order to create their own inheritance for their generations. Okay, how has it affected us? Look at this: poverty and despair. Okay, poverty and despair. So it has caused generational poverty, because this is a child here. Poverty is here, as well as despair, because this sign back here, you're not going to be able to see it too well, but it says not hiring on this sign back here. Okay, and so they have created an energy of despair and poverty over the heads of the black man and woman, because they see themselves again as being rightfully the owners of the black man and woman in America. I'm going to pull one more card from this. How has carrying the kidnapper's name affected the black man, woman, and child? So what we have coming out here is house, and at the bottom is coffin. Okay, so these people have created financial abundance for themselves. Okay, they have created financial abundance for themselves through the enslavement of our ancestors and through enforcing these names over us for generations. Okay, and also a lot of death. Okay, death has been largely a factor that has like through the sacrifice, the rituals, the slayings, the killings, the open, hangings and lynchings that they have done and continue to do. Okay, because they still lynch black men and women through shootings, through police shootings, and even through criminal activity that they do and claim they never come to a conclusion of what happened. Okay, these are things that they're doing behind the scenes, and then they come forward and say, well, it's a cold case, we have no true evidence behind what took place, when they know good and well they took that person, they used them as a sacrifice to feed the beast of this structure, and they probably took their organs and all types of things that these people do. And so they create wealth on the backs of our ancestors and those of us who have carried these names. But this is why I want you to stay to the end, because we're going to break that curse. We're going to break that so-called stronghold that they have had over our ancestors, over us, and over our generations who have carried these names, okay? We are going to reestablish our authority. This is what they did not want you to awaken to do. So how has this affected us? Look at this. This says wants to control you. So they use these names as a measure of controlling the black man, woman, and child, and saying, okay, I am in power. I'm in a position of power and authority over you based on the fact that you carry my name. And so because you have my name, you are my property, and therefore I can do with you as I please. Okay? And so, of course, no, they don't outright come and say this in your face, but they show it through the way that they try to manipulate situations to create outcomes, okay? They're sending dark magic and dark energy towards these people who, towards those of us who have carried the name of our kidnappers, of the kidnappers of our ancestors, okay? How is it affecting us? This says fall from grace, good intentions, and fall from grace, okay? And so they've taken a fall from grace because clearly they did not have good intentions, okay? They tried to pretend that they had good intentions by using biblical text to support what they was doing, okay? But they have taken a fall from grace because that's all out blasphemy. That's a lie on the Most High God. The Most High God created us to be in positions of power and authority over our lives. He created us as the majority because we understood that in our strength and in our power, we would not ultimately, it's two types of people in this world. You got some that's built to be just wicked as hell. Then you have others who are built to be just, honorable, okay? And who are built to have a natural spiritual connection to all things that exist, okay? And so these particular people, they was built psychologically distorted, okay? It's some sort of genetic mutation, okay, that happened to these particular people. I'm not saying all Caucasians. I'm saying these particular people who continue in this psychological discord, okay, and who continue to have this superiority complex over black men, women, and children in order to maintain their power and wealth. It's a sick obsession that they have here, okay? And so these people have taken a fall from grace because, first of all, they know that we are chosen. They know that we are chosen. And so their agenda, like I told you, they went and they handpicked who they wanted, okay? They surveillance, they looked into who they was actually buying as their slave. Okay, they knew the powers that we possessed, and this is why they stripped them from us and they used them to create power for themselves. They harnessed our energy to create power for themselves through the fear and through the enslavement, okay, and through stripping us of our names. Manipulation. They did this in order to sacrifice us. That's what they have been doing, sacrificing us. So they take they have given us these names in hopes that later on, if they needed a sacrifice, they would be able to say, okay, well, that's my property over there. So that one right there is the one that I want to sacrifice at this time in order to create whatever it is that they're trying to create. Okay. So also, let's see what else is coming out in terms of how this has affected those of us who have carried these names. How has this affected the black man, woman, and child? This card came out in reverse. This is stopping your financial abundance, keeping you from moving towards your success and towards your financial stability. Sacrifice is here, okay? The hangman is all about sacrifice, keeping you stuck, okay? How that's affected us is caused financial disruption because these people, pretty much once you have that social security number, you have that birth certificate, you have the last name of the so-called slave master, the kidnapper of your ancestors. They put all of these things together within their system, which they created, okay? And they see it as they keep track with everything that you do, okay? And so if you go and get governmental assistance, then they say, okay, well, this is a debt that they now owe to us. And so governmental assistance, of course, which many black men, women, and children end up having to utilize because they stripped the black man and woman of their natural inheritance, okay, as well as spiritual gifts in order to uplift their structure. And so you end up with someone who is codependent and someone who feels powerless and inferior. And so in that energy, that causes a that Stockholm syndrome, where you feel like you have to receive the help of the person who has caused you harm. Okay, and so that's the position that they placed many of our ancestors in all the way up until today, and they're hoping to continue this agenda through the generations that proceed from us. But we are here in our awakening, we are here in our power and our strength, understanding that we possess the ability right here from where we sit to create and establish righteous judgment in the spiritual realm, expecting that it will manifest in the physical. So this is why I need y'all to stick around so that you can receive this message. And so also, yes, the Wheel of Fortune is here in the reverse, and the King of Swords is here. This is someone in a position of authority, someone who is like an officer, or someone that's like a lawyer, or someone who is so-called in position of authority. They use this energy to control and to keep us, to keep our ancestors and those black men and women in this hamster wheel of karmic debt. Okay, the Wheel of Fortune is in reverse, indicating that it's the cycle that is never able to close out, never able to complete itself. You're never able to break free of having this devil, because the devil is on top of this wheel here when it's in reverse, of having this demonic energy over your heads, because they enforce it upon you. They enforce it upon you through this so-called judicial system, okay, and through their so-called wealth and power. And so it has influenced the black man and woman to be in this stuck energy, feeling as if you cannot move towards your financial abundance because they create it that way. So if you seek out, or if you receive assistance through these people, they mark it off as being a debt that is owed. Or if you have, if you become ill, sickly, and you have to utilize medical assistance through this governmental structure, they mark it off as well as being a debt that you owe. And so they pass it on from one generation to the next, and saying that, okay, well, that one right there, that's my property, they owe this debt, and so as a result, we're going to take their life and use them as a sacrifice because they owe us this, okay, and use it to uplift or to heal or to help someone else in their family to stay alive, because they see the black man and woman as their property. So they have created many tower moments for the black man and woman, because this thing is not built on a solid foundation. And so there's been a lot of death. There's been a lot of tragic situations that have happened. Why? Because we have a very wicked ass judicial system who does not practice honor and integrity. They do not practice true law. What they practice is criminality, okay? And they have been able to build it and cloak and create this illusion for the masses into believing that they are actually creating a law that is established through integrity, when in fact is through the people who run this structure are the criminals. They are the criminals, okay? And they are the ones who should be behind bars or 8 feet deep, okay, however far they need to go. They are the ones that should be there, but instead they have used reverse psychology to make others believe that it is the black man and woman who belongs in that position. But it's all just, it's all an illusion. It's what they have created, okay, in order to maintain their position of so-called power. And so let me see. How has the kidnapper benefited from giving the black man and woman their last name? How have they benefited from this? Shh. How have they benefited from this? So it's been a secret. They've kept this in secrecy, okay? But they've been able to move forward and to gain abundance and success, forward movement, based on this thing that they have done in secret, how it has benefited them. They've kept it in the darkness, okay? But it's coming out now. And for those of you who actually hear this message and it resonates with you, if something rings, and you hear it and it's like, okay, I understand now what this is all about. They benefited by keeping us in bondage, okay? This was the goal, to keep us entrapped and in bondage, okay? The prison system has largely been something that they have benefited from, because they've been able to use those prisoners as a way of keeping the black man out of the household, keeping him in this position of inferiority and fear of the judicial system. So he's walking on eggshells, thinking that at any given moment he can end up going and becoming incarcerated or losing his life based on this corrupt system, okay, and based on the intimidation tactics that they use, okay. And so they incite fear. This is how they have benefited, by secretly inciting fear and creating this corrupt prison system. Hold on. Yes, they have benefited because they've been able to gain financial abundance and buy homes for themselves. As you saw a house come out earlier, okay? These people are able to get land, property, okay? These things that are naturally, they belong to the black man and woman, because the black man and woman are the ones who built this land, okay? Literally built this land and never received any compensation for it. Instead, we received more of them. They've crumb fed us, is what they did. They've crumb fed the black man and woman, okay, and pretended that it was a just thing that they was doing. It was a righteous thing that they was doing by crumb feeding the black man and woman, okay. So they have benefited from keeping us in a place of inferiority and of lack mentality, okay, so that they can maintain their wicked structure. How have they benefited? They've been able to move on, and release themselves. They haven't had to deal with that energy of poverty. Okay, they've been able to start brand new without and to avoid a lot of the karmic debt that's coming to them. Okay, and they have obviously, though, it's getting ready to come to an end. With that tower card, I strongly feel this tower is largely dealing with the current structure, because it was built on wickedness. It was built on a false foundation. Okay, and so they're being watched, okay? We have been watching them very clearly. Look at this, because they're very demonic people, okay? Very demonic structure. And so they watch very closely to see who is getting ready to awaken, who is setting themselves free from the chains that kept them bound spiritually, who is awakening to their powers and their gifts, who is reclaiming their inheritance, their naturally God-given inheritance, okay? And so these people are obsessively watching. This is why when you are born, they take your birth date, the time that you was born, your name, all of these things. They look into your astrology chart to see who would eventually awaken and at what particular time they would awaken. And they try to create scenarios and stumbling blocks, okay, using dark magic, using the judicial system, whatever tactics they can use against you and your children, they'll try to use that. And that's why they watch you, obsessively watch you, to see who's going to come in and who's going to use this sword of truth to cut themselves free from this enslavement and this entrapment that they have placed over the minds of the black man, woman, and child, because they want to keep you chained and bound. So they watch very closely to see who's going to try to release themselves, who's going to come in and be the one that's the rebel that releases themselves from these chains, okay? And so these people are highly obsessed with black men and women, okay? Truly highly obsessed with us, okay? And so let me see what else is coming out here. It's time for us to start putting in the work to heal. Okay, we got to start doing the work daily, consciously doing the work to heal, and to release ourselves. Okay, to release ourselves from the chains that have kept us bound for generations. We have to establish our authority in the spiritual realm now that we understand the connection between names, between why they use these names and what they're using it for today, how they're using it against us today. They keep track of you based on the name that you hold today, okay? Even if it's your marriage name, they still have a record of your surname or your original name prior to marriage, and they track you through your social security number, okay? They are able to keep up with what purchases you're making, where you're living, who you're with, what school you're going to, what job you're working at. They're able to track all of these things. What's going on with your medical history? What's going on with your mental? All of these things they're able to keep record of, because they're not just utilizing the judicial system that they created, but they're also using dark magic and very lower level entities in order to try and create certain things for you in a spiritual realm, so that you would never awaken. They need for the illusion to be maintained. Okay, they need to keep the illusion intact in order to keep their system intact. So I'm gonna just pull a couple of cards from here and see what comes out. Self gratification. That's what it's always been about. In order to gratify themselves, they do these things without integrity. Okay, they lack integrity. They've always lacked integrity. And it's always been about self-empowerment and keeping them in a position of superiority. Separation, okay? They know that in terms of separation, many people have separation anxiety because they have placed these chains over the minds. Like I said, Stockholm syndrome, when especially I was looking into also the Willie Lynch letter. That particular letter, they're now trying to say that it was false, okay, that it was a hoax. But that's good. That's a damn lie. This Willie Lynch letter was created in 1712, okay, which was prior to the U.S. corporation, the U.S. government being created, okay, or being established. In 1712, the Willie Lynch letter spoke of a method of control to keep black people in psychological chains for generations. And this method was also to create an inferior mentality on the enslaved to eliminate strength in numbers. So they had already come up with, they had people who was working, strategically to create a system that would last, that would allow them to maintain their power for generations to come. And I told you, these people, they don't work for just 5-10 years ahead. No, they do things to strategically keep people in inferiority for at least another 2, 3, 4, 500, 600 years. Okay, if they can stretch it even further than that based on whatever technology they are using or whatever agenda they're doing behind the scenes, then they will do that. And so understand that these people understood that separation. Many people fear being separated from the system because they have enslaved the minds of black people to the degree where they've stripped the power from the whole of black people. But now we are rising, we are awakening, okay? I told you the sun is now closer to the earth, and so that's allowing us to awaken. The vibrational frequency is higher. And so in an attempt to put us back to sleep, that's why they are introducing the blue pill, which I've talked to you about in a previous video. So many of you know what I'm referring to when I say the blue pill, okay? The blue pill, they're using that as a way of putting us back to sleep, or creating dormant DNA, or to prevent DNA activation, so that we don't pass this information, our inherited information, down to our children, who they are hoping to create a stumbling block for them, so that they're not able to arise in numbers to create power and authority over this corrupt system, or to tear down and to destroy this corrupt system. So it's all about keeping us asleep in large numbers, whatever they need to do, even if it means turning on a body cam and standing on top of a man's neck for everyone to see for 5-10 minutes, while he screams that he can't breathe. Let's do this so that we can incite fear and make them think that, and put them back to sleep, to keep them from arising against us in numbers, because they understand that they are the minority. And so because we are the majority, naturally, to come together and all of us be awakened in our power and the authority that we possess in both the spiritual and the physical realm, naturally we would be able to overtake them easily, because they're only 1/10 of the planet. And so the agenda, the goal has been to go and to corrupt all areas, all four corners of the earth, with their sick perversions, with their fear tactics, so that we would not ultimately rise up, okay? Because like I told you, it all begins in the spiritual realm. So even if we're not able to get to one another physically and to join together physically, Spiritually, when we join together and awaken to who we are, and we reclaim our naturally given inheritance from the Most High God, which is our ability to understand that our thoughts create things, and our ability to understand that we free ourselves mentally first before we free ourselves in any other way. We free ourselves in a spiritual realm first. Once we actually establish that, these people are done. Okay, the entire structure is annihilated, including their bloodline. Okay, including their bloodline, because in power is how they've been able to maintain. In lack of power is how they die off. That's just a fact. Okay? And so let me just tell you all what I would like for you to write down and burn. Write down, I release the stronghold over my ancestors, kidnappers, and all dark energies attacked to the name forced upon me. I break the chain of the enemy and destroy its agenda. I release my ancestors, myself, and all generations that proceed through my lineage, in spirit and in flesh. And so it is. You write that down and you burn it. As many of you who know who you are, gods and goddesses, kings and queens, I need you all to come together. We have to do this in unison, okay? We need to establish this energy in the spiritual realm, and you must know that it is true, and this is what is getting ready to be established on our behalf, because the Most High is working on our behalf. And in the spiritual realm, we are putting that energy out there using the element of wind, fire, mind, spoken word, and our intentions to create this and establish this. Okay, this is why they place shackles over the mind, so that the mind is never able to awaken to its abilities and the powers that we possess in the spiritual realm. Now that you know, we're using it in unison to create this. Okay, now that's what you write down and burn. Please rewind this and write it down, because I'm not going to, I would hope that you all don't come back and ask me to repeat it. Just write it down. And, fast forward the video, however you have to do it, okay? If someone could timestamp this, please, I would definitely appreciate it. Now, in terms of what you need to write on a candle, you can get you a white candle, which I suggest. If you go to the Dollar General, they have these large pillar candles that you can use, okay? And you can get you a black Sharpie and write on it, okay? Make sure you clear it off with your sage or your salt water or something like that. Clean it off really well. Take the labels off of there. And you're going to write on there, I create freedom of all blacks in America, in spirit and in flesh. I create freedom of all blacks in America, in spirit and in flesh. And you're going to allow that candle to burn all the way through until it goes out on its own, okay? Again, we are using the element of fire to establish this in the spiritual realm, and we are doing this in unison. Group consciousness is where we begin to take our power back. It does not begin with marching, because as you can see, marching has been done for quite a long time now, and it has not been effective. We have to first destroy the agenda and the enemy and the beast in the spiritual realm through our intentions, through our power that has been imparted through us, that was stripped from us, okay? And they put us to sleep to the power that we possess. But now that we have awakened, you establish this authority here, and we do this in numbers, in unison. So even if it's just one of you, two or more, where there's two or more that conjoin to do the same thing, that's where change begins to happen. And so I implore you, Black man, black woman, gods, goddesses, kings, and queens, please come together. Let's do this in unison so that we can shake up the energy. And let's see, we're going to watch together to see how this affects and influences the energy of the enemy. So I love you all. I hope that you was able to receive something from this message. I have a lot of things that's been coming in to me, and I'm going to be discussing some other things with you all in the coming future. And I look forward to hearing from you all. Thank you for the comments, the likes. Thank you for the donations. Thank you for the beautiful emails. And if you want a private reading from me, you can always email me. I do leave that in the description box below, so please be sure to check. I love y'all, and I'll talk to you all next time.